Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. Hoss Lightning Saddleback's August 30th death has left his community of Samson Cree Nation and the homeless community in nearby Wetaskiwin shaken 3 weeks after his shooting by RCMP there. APTN's Leanne Sanders traveled to the community to talk to members who want to see change.
He was let down by the whole system.
Community activist Stephanie Fleury says when the 15-year-old was shot, he was likely looking for his mother, who was not homeless, but was staying with relatives. His mother spent time in a field where the unhoused gathered as a community. The field is near where Hoss was shot.
Because he was in crisis and he was looking for his mom. I don't think he was out to hurt anyone. He was scared. That's why he called the police for help. And how does a call for help turn into you getting killed by the police that you called for help? It doesn't make sense.
Fleury said police had other options, such as calling a crisis worker, something echoed by another local activist.
I wish they would have called mobile health from Muskogees to come and stop this interaction. I wish there was people that are out there to help with crisis that people are having. There's nothing.
The fear left in the wake of the shooting hasn't left this man, who was unhoused until this past spring, but now has custody of his young teenage son. He asked for his identity to be hidden, he says, out of fear of the police. We will call him Mike.
It was a 15-year-old boy, and I was worried because I got picked up tonight, and I thought it was my son, and I couldn't sleep at all.
What do you tell him to try to keep him safe?
Stay home and just play those games. I'll pay for everything else, just play those games. Don't even come out in these streets, because these streets ain't around here. It's messed up.
Terry Smallboy, a community member, said everyone is still in shock over Lightning Saddleback's death.
I feel as though it wasn't about the RCMP feeling like they were threatened. They suffer an identity crisis far more than our own people, I feel. Once they're in uniform, there's a completely different person in that uniform than there is outside of that uniform.
At the time, Lightning Saddleback's death was among 7 deaths of First Nations people involving RCMP or police services in Canada within 3 weeks. That number has now grown to 9. All remain under investigation by outside agencies. As for preventing something like this from happening again, Stephanie Fleury has some ideas.
I think that our res needs its own tribal police, and if the RCMP is going to deal with Native people, they need to have a crisis worker to talk in between them, because the police use excessive force.
Hoss Lightning's family is planning an awareness walk on September 30th, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, when everyone is reminded that every child matters. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Wetaskiwin, Alberta.
And you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, for more on this story. Well, more than 50 years ago, 8 students from residential schools in southern Manitoba were returning home to Bunnabonaby, Cree Nation, by plane. Shortly after takeoff in Winnipeg, the plane crashed, killing all, including the pilot. This week, a historical marker commemorating the victims has been unveiled near the crash site. Sab Jonesa has that story.
The unveiling of this commemorative monument comes 52 years after a tragedy. The names of 8 students and a pilot are engraved in stone to be forever remembered. They were on their way to Bunnabonaby Cree Nation on June 24, 1972, when their plane crashed shortly after takeoff in Winnipeg, leaving no survivors.
Everyone in our community remembers this as the darkest day in our community's history, and we need to ensure that it's never forgotten. And we owe it to the 8 students who made the ultimate sacrifice while trying to pursue their dreams and we owe it to their parents, siblings, and friends to celebrate the lives of their loved ones for the short time they were with us here on Earth.
The students, aged 14 to 21, were returning home from residential schools near Manitoba's capital, roughly 600 kilometers south of Bunbonabie. What would have been a joyous reunion for the families who couldn't see their loved ones for months at a time while they were away turned to devastation as they learned their fate. Bunbonabie Chief Richard Hart says if residential schools didn't exist, perhaps the students would still be alive today.
Many First Nation students across Canada returned to their communities with a broken spirit that could not be healed, and that affected their families from generation to generation. Many students never returned. Many died alone while at these schools and were buried in unmarked graves. Others, like our students, died just trying to get home to where the familiar and where the family and where the feeling of safety lied.
The monument stands only a few hundred meters away from where the plane crashed in a Winnipeg suburb. It's still not clear what caused the accident. The Royal Aviation Museum of Western Canada requested the monument's creation, and it was unanimously approved by City Council. Stacey Robinson is the niece of Iona Wienusk, one of the students who died.
To think of how the excitement these 8 students were feeling, taking off, coming home.
She says the monument may bring closure for some, but not all.
There's still that heartache that they're missing their sisters and their brothers, right? Kind of hard to say there's a closure, but having the stone here means a lot to the families.
Surrounding the monument are 9 saplings, one for each person, to symbolize growth and the future. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Ottawa now, where discussions over the First Nations Clean Drinking Water Act, known as Bill C-61, continued in a House of Commons committee. This week, chiefs from Ontario and one from Saskatchewan voiced their opinions on the proposed bill. Here's Annette Francis with the details.
During the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee, Ontario Regional Chief Abram Benedict said Ontario First Nations are the most impacted by the failure to provide clean drinking water. His message to MPs is the Act, while it's not perfect, must pass.
There are entire generations that have been unable to see clean drinking water from their taps. And I recently had an opportunity to be in Escandaga, which is one of the communities that has had a boil water advisory for 30 years. And so when you put that in context, there's been children that have been born, raised, and now are adults and still have had to live with boil water advisories. And so in today's context, that is extremely chilling and unacceptable.
First Nations consultant Irving LeBlanc said watershed protection zones and jurisdictional issues have to be dealt with within this bill.
The federal government has to come in there, and as it's been said, federal government has to come in and I know this was mentioned, to work, make sure provinces work collaboratively with First Nations in terms of establishing these protection zones, because water doesn't end at the boundary. Water has no boundaries. So I think it's going to be one major area that will need to be looked at clearly.
NDP MP Nikki Ashton questioned the chiefs about a current court action by the Shamattawa First Nation in northern Manitoba. 2 years ago, it started a class action lawsuit over the federal government's failure to provide clean drinking water. Chief Erica Boudin of Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan said in spite of this, the bill needs to pass.
We have opportunity with this bill, even if the government is currently faced with having to do the right thing. Yes, we acknowledge that the court has stated that they do the right thing, but we must still work together in order to ensure that the death toll goes down, that we have the safe water drinking, that we have adequate funding, that there are legal tools in our toolbox with the provincial and the federal and the First Nations.
The committee will continue its study on Bill C-61 on Thursday. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A former residential school turned university has a new exhibit on display to help remember a dark chapter in Canada's history. That story and more still to come. Welcome back. In 1971, a former residential school in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, was repurposed as a post-secondary institution. It's taking steps to ensure the building's history is not forgotten. The structure that houses Algoma University was once the Shingwauk Indian Residential School. And as APTN's Mike McDonald tells us, the main hall at the university has been transformed into a residential school exhibit to educate the public about a dark chapter in Canada's history.
Pictures of Indigenous children line the walls of what is now Shingwauk Hall, located in the main building of Algoma University's Sault Ste. Marie campus. They are the children of Shingwauk. The president of the Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association, whose mother attended the school and was a founding member of the group, urges the public to visit the site.
There's a lot of truth here, and I think you need to know the history and the truth before you can reconcile. So this is a great place to learn, and it's such a beautiful place to learn with the original school here, with the survivors being active on site.
Sisters Jackie Fletcher and Shirley Horn are also founding members of the Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association. With regard to truth and reconciliation, Fletcher says the exhibit is a good start.
I hope it's not going to take 100 years to right the wrongs. And we as residential school survivors are really aging now. There's not many of us left. So we need to make sure that the next generation of people carry on our story so this never happens again.
The residential school didn't only hurt the Native people. It hurt the rest of the population as well, because they were excluded from what the country's agenda. And many people didn't know, or to this day even know, about the residential school.
The Shingwauk exhibit is a place where stories are shared.
I remember this girl. We were in the senior dorm. I don't know what happened. Some kind of trouble took place. She was there, and the next day she was gone. Never heard from her again. I don't know what happened to her. But anyways, yes, this cubby hole. We used to go in there and we would just sit and whisper and talk about home. Talk about our brothers and sisters. We might have stolen some bread and we would share the bread in there. Or one of the girls was supposed to be watching out and I got caught. They pulled me out of there and beat me up and said, "You like it in there?" Pushed me back and said, "Stay in there." But you could see a little bit of light from around that crack. So I was okay with that, and I thought, well, they'll just leave me in here. They got to come and get me sooner or later, because they locked it. They locked me up. Truth and reconciliation is the truth that's being told by survivors, reclaimers, and reconciling with ourselves and with the public. To me, that's how I look at truth and reconciliation.
Events are planned all day on September 30th at Algoma University, starting with a sunrise ceremony at 7:30. Also on the 30th, the public unveiling of the Wawanosh School for Girls Memorial will take place in the afternoon. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
As part of our ongoing coverage for National Truth and Reconciliation Week, We take a look at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. They've just celebrated 10 years of being open to the public, even opening a permanent space for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's witness blanket. But as Tiara Wheatley shows us now, it wasn't always a space the Indigenous community embraced, especially when it came to the telling of the Indian residential school system.
Feasting together is what Indigenous communities have done for centuries following traditional ceremonies. This custom, however, is fairly new inside this institution, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. This honoring is part of the museum giving the Truth and Reconciliation witness blanket a permanent home. Carrie Newman created this piece in 2014 around the time this museum opened.
Thinking about all of the stories that are told here and the weight and the significance.
Down the hall beyond the beat, one of many exhibits showcasing Indigenous people and culture over the past decade. Outside, the building sits on the banks of the Red River at the Forks near downtown Winnipeg. CMHR CEO Aisha Khan knows the significance of this location.
Treaty 1 territory, the birthplace and homeland of the Red River Métis, to be getting our water from Shoal Lake. It's never lost on me.
Khan started here in 2020. One of her missions, making traditional ceremony a vital part of maintaining this space.
So part of our growth really has been to understand our own connection, our own relationship with land, with all of creation, to open ourselves to other ways of knowing and being, to Indigenous ways.
This wasn't always the case here. Controversies plagued the museum since before it even opened.
Historic moment in the story of human rights in Canada.
Winter 2008, a sod turning with Canada and Manitoba politicians of the time. Manitoba First Nations communities felt snubbed for not being included.
Before you finish this building up, I hope.
In 2011, First Nations members from Shoal Lake number 39 protested here. They said Winnipeg's drinking water came from their territory but left them with contaminated water. That same year, while excavating the site, workers discovered 1,000-year-old tribal artifacts. The community was in an uproar, saying proper traditional ceremony wasn't done. Then, in 2013, less than a year before it opened, museum officials said genocide would not be used to describe the residential school's era. Situations that led to this. September 19, 2014. Protests on opening day. Many saying the museum was sugarcoating history, making light of issues like residential schools. Amongst the crowd was activist Michael Champagne.
I remember being so upset as the doors opened because there was such conflict.
Now, exactly 10 years later,
we are willing to witness our institutions begin to bend.
Champagne is one of 5 people bearing witness to the ongoing relationship between this museum, the witness blanket, and the truth-telling of Indigenous stories.
The museum is learning how to be a good relative, and so to me, having the witness blanket here and seeing all of the breadth of Indigenous connections that the museum has committed to demonstrates to me that they actually listened. My hope is that this witness blanket will witness in the next 10 years the drastic reduction of Indigenous children in care in Canada and see all of the children come home.
Behind the scenes all those years was Chandra Erlinson, Director of Indigenous Relations and Community Engagement.
I'd call it a dark time. My family, my relatives, my community asking why I was working here.
She was recruited to work here long before the doors opened, her job mainly consisting of bridge building.
The sanitation of the language around genocide, outright resistance to include that in some of the early messaging was really hard for community, and it was very difficult during that time to be gaining trust when we're working with Indigenous folks in all kinds of ways to build content and tell stories, true stories.
How big are your hands in comparison now to what they were then?
Stories like this one Newman shares of his own daughter's handprints on the witness blanket door from a decade ago when she was 4.
I think about how I started making this for my dad, like in honor of him. I wonder, how does that translate for her? How much stronger does she become?
Stronger in truth, something activists set out to do many moons ago. To ensure traditions and history of the original peoples and their land are at the forefront of this space dedicated to human rights. Tiara Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A Mi'kmaq person has designed this year's orange shirt for Walmart. That story's coming up after the break. Welcome back. Walmart stores across Canada are selling Every Child Matter t-shirts again this year. But this year's design is by a Mi'kmaq artist, Natasha Root. Angel Moore has that story.
The design on these shirts is the creation of Natasha Root of the Listugush Mi'kmaq Nation in Quebec. The Every Child Matters t-shirts are being sold in Walmart stores across Canada. Root couldn't be happier.
Very, very honored. I'm very, very happy and very, very proud.
Root won the NDTR Design Contest held by Indigenous Proud, an Indigenous-owned company that collaborates with Walmart Canada. Root says the wolf design is a symbol of empowerment.
The wolf is one of the 7 sacred teaching animals in our Mi'kmaq culture. So it serves as a timeline, a reminder that, you know, regardless of the era, our children will always matter, and you know, so our strength is going to always be there.
Jesse Keane is a manager at the Halifax Walmart location. He says the shirts are popular with customers.
The response with customers is overwhelming. We sell out the orange shirts every single year in Walmart Canada. This is actually our second time selling out since we've got the shirts in a couple weeks ago.
As well, every September 30th, Walmart associates wear the orange shirts to support National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Keane recalls the first year staff wore them and the reaction from 2 Indigenous co-workers.
Everybody just like a sea of orange that day, everybody wearing their orange shirts supporting. And those 2 associates, they spoke at our meeting and they felt supported in that moment. And it changed me as a leader, it changed the way that I led people. And everybody just has to be included. And that's what I took from that.
Each year, a different design for the orange shirt is chosen. Marlise Wilson is the Senior Director of Merchandising.
Featuring Indigenous artists to tell their story of what that day means to them and the symbolism behind it. For me, getting to learn about the different art styles from all of the different nations has been amazing.
This is the 4th year Walmart Canada has been selling Every Child Matters shirts.
It broadens like the knowledge more of what Orange Shirt Day is for people who are not Indigenous, you know, and it's reconciling like who we are as people, and it's connecting us. So, you know, it's a great opportunity, and I'm proud of it. I'm very proud.
Walmart Canada will donate 100% of the profits to the Orange Shirt Society and Indian Residential School Survivor Society. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Thanks, Angel. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. For news anytime, though, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And be sure to join us on Monday, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Our special coverage will kick off right here at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Dennis Ward. Merci miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.